They built a neighborhood on top of my trees and pretended it was legal. The first time I turned the corner and saw a paved street where my driveway should have been, I laughed because that's what you do when something so absurd hits you, you laugh. And then the laugh runs out of your mouth like a coin into a slot, and the sound doesn't come back. My name is Tommy Archer, and I grew up on a ridge that used to belong to my grandmother. Now there are 90 houses and a gated entrance with a brass plaque that says Silver Pine Estates. Like they invented the place overnight and history was just a formatting error. It wasn't always dramatic. My grandmother signed a deed in 1969. There are tax receipts with her name on them, and the old cedar fence posts still have her initials carved into them. That's the part that makes you stubborn. The human handwriting on wood that says someone was here and they cared. I left for a while, worked out of town, did the thing people do when life leans bills, kids' college, a job that eats nights, and I figured the land would wait. Land doesn't wait. It only gets noticed, and when it gets noticed by the wrong sort of people, it's suddenly marketable. The first person I met was Marla Voss, who claimed she'd opened the property for development. She was all pearl studs and patience, a smile that was practiced for civic receptions and HOA meetings. She said, "Mr. Archer, we closed on the parcel years ago, like closing a jar." I said, "You closed on my land." And she tilted her head with this brilliant, precise sympathy, like she was a weather report. "There's nothing personal about it, Tommy," she said. And that's where it stopped being a mistake and started being an act. I tried paperwork, first title searches, old surveys, the county clerk's office, and every piece of paper that had my family's name seemed to be politely ignored by the people who count deeds in bulk. Phone calls turned into polite refusals to escalate. That's when my lawyer, Dana Morales, looked at me and said something I didn't want to hear. Sometimes the only way to prove what you own is to let them build, then show the holes. It felt like watching your shoes get soaked to prove the floor is wet, but Dana was practical. She said the developer's paperwork would create a paper trail that showed intent, and intent is evidence. So I documented everything. I took pictures of foundation stickers and stamped permits with my phone. I logged dates. I left a small ledger on the kitchen table and wrote down names I heard in depositions and the kind of truck that came through at 4 a.m. The more they built, the more their arrogance showed. Preston Hale, the project manager, would stand on the street and laugh with contractors like it was a casino, and they'd all place their bets. Once, when I walked up to the gate to ask a question, a man in a hard hat called out, "This isn't your Sunday stroll anymore, old man." And he meant it. That's when I started to understand how ugly this would get. They retaliated quietly at first, letters with formal fonts threatening litigation, a fake community complaint about trash, anonymous posts on neighborhood boards claiming I was a squatter who never paid property taxes. Then it turned louder. Anonymous men taking pictures of my mailbox at odd hours, a slammed window in the night that left a hairline crack like a promise. They hired a private investigator who seemed keenly interested in my late-night hours and my daughter's college fund. Marla waved her hands and said, "Development is messy, Tommy. People get nervous. But development doesn't target a person's truck or threaten their dog walker people do." The court case was a slow, surgical thing, almost clinical in its cruelty. Evidence hearings where a clerk reads an email and the email reads like an instruction manual for deception. Depositions where men in suits have practiced how to sound surprised. Dana found an email thread between Preston and a title officer with a line that read, "We push it through, and they'll have to fight for it. There's profit in chaos." I remember the feeling in that moment like someone had opened the back of a clock and all the gears were wrong. That email became the needle that started unpicking their whole sweater. There were days when it felt like the world was built of people you could call and people you couldn't. The local TV reporter, Iris Hale, not related to Preston, confusingly called after she got a tip. She came out with a cameraman and asked questions in the way reporters always do, sharp and honest. The story ran at 7. And for a week the internet turned our little ridge into a hashtag. People began to show up who were not developers or lawyers, neighbors from down the mountain who brought casseroles, an old friend who'd become a city councilman, a man from the press who smelled like cigarette smoke and truth. That didn't make the legal fight easier, but it made the night feel less like a trap. In court, the developer's lawyer Slick, perfectly tie-knot, kept saying mistake and oversight, like words could build amnesia. My testimony was simple and ugly and honest. I told the judge about my grandmother's ledger, the cigarette burns on the porch rail, the nights I slept in the trailer by the pines to make sure the survey markers stayed in place. "Why didn't you come sooner?" the lawyer asked with a smile that tried to be a scalpel. "Because I had to work," I said, and it was the truth, and the truth has a way of being stubborn enough to make people uncomfortable. The turning point wasn't one dramatic reveal so much as a collection of small reckonings. Preston's name kept appearing where it shouldn't have. A contractor testified he'd been paid under a shell company. Bank records Dana found them showed transfers that matched invoices that never indicated where the lawful permission came from. They'd built on an easement that belonged to the county. They'd backdated a field survey, and they'd relied on the fact that most people won't show up to fight until the bulldozers are humming. The judge, a woman with keen eyes and the patience of someone who'd seen too many clever men try the same trick, paused a long time with the file in front of her and then ordered a temporary injunction on sales. That injunction felt like a reprieve, but it also lit the fuse. Marla cornered me at the courthouse steps, her voice all quiet veneer, and said, "Tommy, you could make this easy. Sell me a sliver. Walk away." I remember looking at her and thinking, sell my grandmother's trees for a sliver of quiet? I said, "You built a town on my history. How much would you sell conscience for?" She smiled the kind of smile that costs less than it looks and walked away with drivers who would call it a tough market. In the end, the public exposure mattered. People got angry in a way that wasn't performative. Homeowners who had bought into Silverpine felt like they were victims too, and I believed them. We formed a meeting in the church hall that smelled of coffee and dust, where I stood under fluorescent lights and proposed something that wasn't simple. Create a community trust, convey titles properly, offer restitution for people who'd paid too much, and hold the developer accountable for fraud and restitution. It was a plan that asked more of us than revenge. It asked for repair. The final scene, and it felt like a film even then, was at the town hall when the developer's company chair was escorted in, hands pressed together like an apologetic monk. The room was packed. The air held its breath. Preston's deposition had been damning. The bank had frozen accounts pending further inquiry. The judge signed papers that would require a formal audit and, quietly, possible criminal referrals. No dramatic jail cell, no movie finale with handcuffs and a parade. Real life rarely gives you a last reel, but there was a judge's order that put a pause on the greed. I kept a small parcel, just enough land to put a cabin on, and I signed away the rest to a trust that would manage the properties at cost for the existing homeowners and make sure any excess fines went to a community fund. People argue about whether I did the right thing, whether I compromised when I should have crushed them. Maybe they're right. Part of the truth is that justice is a negotiation, and sometimes the most righteous path is not the one that leaves you with everything, but the one that keeps the people there from losing their homes. Now when I walk the ridge at sunrise, the air smells like sap and diesel and something like forgiveness. The ledger is framed in my cabin, the handwriting faded but stubborn as ever, and sometimes I think about Marla standing at that gate, wearing her pearls and her practiced sympathy. I don't want her back in my life, but I do want to believe that the law did its job. Messy, imperfect, human. I'm not naive. I know some people will always prefer profit over honor. I also know that people showed up when it mattered, that neighbors brought casseroles, that a reporter with a tired cigarette found the story, that a lawyer named Dana kept scanning until she found the paper trail. So here's what I want from you. Tell me what you'd do. Was I right to turn the rest of the land into something that fixed the hurt, or should I have held out for every last acre? Do developers like Marla ever change, or do we just paper over the damage and call it progress? Drop a comment. Tell your story of a place you thought was safe, and whether justice looked like closure or a compromise. If you've ever felt bulldozed by someone who had more lawyers than conscience, say so and share this with someone who might care.